what's up everybody? Welcome back to another video. My name is Schneider, and today we're going to be talking about the TT Artisan 35mm dual bokeh T2.1 Cine lens. TT Artisan sent me this lens to review and to keep for this video. No money was exchanged, and they have no say in what I say in this video. Partnerships like these help me to continue reviewing gear for the channel with no risk to myself and with the benefit to you to see real-world examples of this equipment. Now, in the past few years, the market has become actually quite competitive in the world of budget Cine lenses. However, none of them offer the unique feature that this TT Artisan 35mm Cine lens offers. The defining feature of this lens and what makes it so special is that you can actually adjust the style of bokeh. There's a little knob and a slider on the top of the lens next to the aperture ring where you can adjust it anywhere from soft to bubble. And later in this video, I'll show you examples and compare what soft bokeh looks like versus bubble bokeh. But this is a feature that I've actually not seen on any lens before. The only other kind of tuning thing that I've seen is not actually a lens, but an adapter made by Module 8. And I actually got to test those when they were first being developed. But those ones are a little bit different because they actually emulate different expensive, high-end, vintage Cine lenses. And this one is actually built into the lens itself. And like I said, it allows you to adjust the style of the bokeh. Now, if you don't know what bokeh is, it's kind of describing the character of the out of focus regions of the image that the lens produces, and different lenses create different kind of looks in the bokeh in the background. And so a lot of really high-end lenses are chosen in part by what type of bokeh they have, what style, if it's sharp, if it's smooth, if it's spherical or slightly distorted. Those are the kinds of things that give your image a really unique character. When I first unboxed the lens, I was really impressed, honestly. It's all metal construction. It feels really nice and solid in your hand. It feels really well built. And I love the graphics on the side of the lens, the typography and the font. The aperture ring and the focus ring have some nice resistance to them. They're not totally smooth, so they make it a lot easier to get really smooth rack focuses. You're not gonna kind of bump it and adjust it too much. The front diameter has a filter thread of 82mm, which is also really nice. 82mm is a standard filter size. It's usually the biggest size that companies make. So if you wanted to attach a threaded variable ND or mist filter or anything like that to the lens, you can stack those and attach them to the front. The markings on the lens are viewed from the top. So if you're a solo operator or if you're doing everything yourself, you can see what aperture you're at and you can see your focus distance by peering over the top of the lens, because I think this lens is mostly geared towards solo filmmakers or individual creators. The lens covers full frame sensors, which is really nice, and it comes in multiple mount types. Right now I'm using the X mount on my Fujifilm X-H2S, but it also comes in L mount, Z mount, RF mount, and E mount. 35mm isn't my favorite focal length on the X-H2S because of the crop sensor, but if I was using this on a full frame sensor like the FX3, I think 35mm is a really nice focal length for full frame sensors. I would say that these lenses render a little bit on the warm side, which I don't mind. Depending on what T-stop you're at and depending on what bokeh style you're at, the vignetting is pretty minimal, but it does change based on what setting you're using. And that is the same in terms of image distortion. If you're on bubble or soft or somewhere in between, the center of the image has slightly different distortion. The edges in all of the different modes are pretty straight. There's no edge distortion. In terms of focus breathing, the lens definitely has noticeable focus breathing. I wouldn't say it's distracting focus breathing, but when you're racking back and forth between a close object and a far object, you can definitely see the lens breathing a little bit. Now, I have to say, this lens took a little bit of getting used to. Not only am I not used to being able to decide what the bokeh style is of a lens, I'm usually choosing a lens based on that, but also it comes with a few caveats and a few gotchas and some trade-offs that I think it's important to consider before you purchase this lens. Initially, what I was most curious about is what soft looks like versus what bubble looks like. There's actually a noticeable difference between soft and bubble, and I would definitely say bubble was my favorite looking bokeh. It has sharp edges, bright points in the image really pop, and it makes for a really interesting, unique looking background if you have things are out of focus. Now, it creates a visually striking and a visually busy image, but sometimes some people might find it a little bit distracting to have all of that noisy, bubbly bokeh in the background. That's compared to soft, which is very, very smooth, very soft, and the bokeh just kind of blends in with itself. It creates a really nice gradient background, and it has a really nice, just soft quality with a bit of a glow look to it. It wasn't until I started looking at in-focus regions between the two modes that I started to get a little bit disappointed with the lens. So if you're shooting at t2.1 and you're in soft mode, it's almost like adding an intense mist filter or a glow or some sort of blooming filter to the lens. And this was really, really intense. Like, it almost looked like the lens was fogged up or blurry, and I found it difficult to find the focus plane when I was shooting in this mode. When I brought it in, I was a little bit surprised by how intense the soft look is for in-focus regions. Now, that's compared to bubble, which is definitely on the sharper side, but I would say definitely not anywhere near clinical sharpness of a typical modern Cine lens. In either mode, the image is a little bit soft and a little bit difficult to find focus. I actually filmed a whole talking head portion yesterday where I brought it in to resolve and realized that the entire thing of myself was out of focus, even though it looked like it was in focus on the monitor. And I even had my friend Micah focus it for me while I was sitting here, and it just did not look good. This kind of made me think, what happens if I stop the lens down a little bit to say T2.2 or T2.8 or T4 to see what happens then. Now, in my testing, what I did was focus on a region that's close, and I would set it to soft or bubble, and I would actually move the aperture ring. So I would go from T2.1 to T2.8 and then open it back up again. And then in Resolve, I've stabilized the exposure so that you can only see what happens when you adjust the aperture to the blooming and the bokeh. So you can see right here that I'm opened up to T2.1, and then I close it down to T2.8, close it down some more and go back and forth, and you can kind of see the difference between the two modes in terms of how wide open your aperture is. And to my surprise, that actually cleaned the image up quite a bit, especially in the soft mode. If you stop down from T2.1, which is the widest that the lens opens, just to T2.8, which is just a little bit closed down, you'll find that the image gets a lot sharper in the in-focus regions. The blooming goes down quite a bit, and the image is, I would say acceptable. It's the same for the bubble side. I would say shooting at T2.1, you're gonna get a soft image, but closing down to T2.8, you're gonna get a lot more of a nice image with sharp regions, and you'll still get kind of the bubble effect in the background. So unfortunately, that's kind of the downside, is that if you're not looking to get a super stylized image, I would say that you should always shoot at T2.8 or above so that you can at least get some things in focus and cut down on the blooming if you're using soft bokeh. The next interesting characteristic that I discovered when I was testing this lens is that the soft and the bubble bokeh feel like they're on different sides of the focus plane. I have no idea how they actually built this lens or how the bokeh mechanism works, but I found that when you're all the way to soft, the things in the background are going to be soft bokeh, but anything that's in the foreground of your subject is actually going to have the bubble bokeh look. And then on the opposite side, anything on the bubble mode in the background it's going to have the bubble bokeh, but in the foreground of your subject it's going to be soft. So I found that this was actually a good trade-off since I preferred bubble. I don't mind that things in the foreground are soft and then background is bubble because I think it's less distracting. I like to shoot with things in the foreground, and so that's something I'm always paying attention to. It creates a more visually dynamic image, but if you're just shooting something straight on, you don't have to worry about that. The last interesting aspect I discovered with this lens is that the two different bokeh modes have different close focus distances. So if you're shooting in bubble, the close focus distance is a little bit further than if you're shooting in soft. And actually when you're shooting in soft mode, if you're all the way, the close focus distance is extremely close and the lens almost acts like a macro lens. And I think this has something to do with why it blooms so much when you focus far away when you're in soft mode, but I'm not really sure what's happening. But that's kind of a side benefit, is this lens can act like a macro lens when you're in soft. It just means that you're gonna have those soft characteristics and you might need to stop down. So this lens is honestly one of the most interesting lenses I've reviewed, and I struggle to kind of wrap my mind around my thoughts and to figure out who this lens is for, what the best use case for this lens is, and if you should buy it or not, and whether or not I would buy it if I wasn't sent it by TT Artisan. I think this lens provides a really unique ability to adjust the bokeh style. I think it gives a really intense creative look. So if you're shooting music videos or more stylized videos, or you want a really interesting look, this lens might be an interesting option for you. But at the same time, typically if I'm looking to have a stylized look, I'll buy different filters or put a mist filter on, and that way I'm not buying a whole specific lens for that look, I'm just adjusting the lenses that I have. But this lens is also on the cheap side for a Cine lens. This lens is $380 USD new. It only comes in 35mm, it's not part of a lens set, but for a lens, that's actually relatively cheap, and it might be an interesting trade-off if you're looking to get a unique looking image. I think the other really interesting aspect of this lens is just the build quality and the metal construction, the rings, everything about this lens visually and the lens itself is really high quality and really nice to use, and I love how it looks on my rig. I think the problems come with all of the different trade-offs that you have to consider and deal with when you're actually shooting with this lens in the real world. I would say in conclusion, this lens is really unique. It offers some really interesting image characteristics. The bubble mode, bokeh, looks really cool in the background, and I think it's a really visually interesting looking image. I think if you're using it for a creative video or a music video, it does give off a little bit of vintage lens vibes or damaged lenses or a really ethereal kind of style. So if that's what you're going for, this lens could be a really cool option for you. If you're interested in purchasing these lenses, I have a link down in the description where you can purchase them. They are affiliate links and they help support the channel, so I'd appreciate if you use those to buy. I also color graded all of the shots in this video using my F-Log2C LUT pack. You can find that on LUTcompany.com. I also sell a lot of other conversion LUTs for Sony, Canon, iPhone, stuff like that. And I also sell a Super 8 emulation called Fake 8 Film Lab. As always, leave any questions in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.